Hello, welcome to the Weatherquest farming forecast. Another forecast that's got some rain in it. Not all wet, but a fair bit of rain, especially at the beginning. And I know we've dealt with a lot recently, but we've also had a couple of dry days, and we'll see why those have occurred in a moment or two. First of all, I just want to spend a few moments talking about the last lot of rain, and you can see we've had in the rainfall accumulation data, you can see the wet weather over eastern parts of Wales, the southwestern Midlands. Another patch of fairly persistent and heavy rain at times moved through northern parts of England, and those same areas that had the flooding recently, I'm afraid, were probably very anxious about this system as it came north, but luckily it kept on moving rather than stopped over the same area for many hours. So that was a good thing, and luckily we've just about seen the end of all that unsettled weather. Something to just mention before we leave this image of rainfall accumulations is that we haven't forgotten to put data over here. All of Western Scotland through Central Scotland, Southwest Scotland, the Lake District, the Isle of Man, Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, all areas showing up with no data. Well, dry, predominantly dry weather. Now, not totally dry, obviously, but predominantly dry. And that's an unusual situation to have at this time of the year, when typically these areas would be expecting some quite heavy rainfall. So moving on, we're going to have a look at the typical performance of evaporation as we go through a year. Now, you obviously know that the summer, the evaporation rates are really high, and it takes only a few minutes for a puddle after a heavy shower to evaporate. And that's because in a month, we would average in central and eastern England perhaps 75 millimetres of evaporation. Now, that's quite a lot, obviously, but look, as the graph comes down through the autumn towards the winter, how quickly those figures fall off. So October, the month we've just had, 30 millimetres in the month on average for that region, but November, that's pretty much halved down to 18 millimetres, and halved again down to 9 in December. So we've really run out of options for getting rid of water from the fields other than letting it drain away, or the only other thing you can do is transport it away. And to do that, you need the wind to blow strongly, which is why during these last 2 days of fine weather, it hasn't really had much impact on the surface water, because the winds have been, in many parts of the country where it needed to get rid of water, the winds have been fairly slack, sort of calm weather. So not much transport going on. Well, the thing that does do transport is a jet stream. Okay, admittedly it's in the upper atmosphere, but it shows where the lows are going. And this one's been stuck over us for a while. So it's the reason why we've had this wispy, fine cirrus cloud over us. But we're also seeing the next jet stream buckling as it comes across the Atlantic, and that's going to drive some systems down across Biscay into western France and Spain. But eventually we'll have to deal with what happens to the rest of this jet stream behind me as it tries to push in from the Atlantic. One of the things to bear in mind, as a jet stream becomes buckled, very north-south looking, that tends to make it move more slowly across the chart. So that's why some of these systems can give us some perhaps breaks of a couple of days of the fine weather before they get here, but equally, if you're under the rainy bit, you could well have a couple of days of that sitting right over the top of you. So unsettled is the phrase, and this is what an unsettled set of charts looks like, except that you've got this ridge of high pressure through the middle of the country. That's where we've had the dry weather, where we've had the sunshine, but unfortunately light winds, so not much evaporation in the middle of the country, but also clear nights means frosts, and we had quite a sharp frost over many areas last night. Now, once this low weakens and moves away, we're going to allow room for this one to come through. And here it comes. We're going to see slow-moving areas of low pressure with their fronts, bands of rain moving around them. There will be times when the eastern side doesn't get much rain, but eventually it gets here. And you can see by about Thursday of this week, in 2 or 3 days' time, we're going to see this area of low pressure just sitting over us for the second half of the week. Now, there are still gaps in here where it's not raining particularly hard, but there's always another area of rain just up the road, so to speak. So it's not going to stay dry and guaranteed to be dry for long enough to make much impact, even though with these isobars close together, we have got stronger winds to help with those evaporation rates. Anyway, moving along. we can push things on to the end of the week, and you can see we've got several areas of low pressure. When you get areas of low pressure rotating around each other, they can be a little bit flighty as to how quickly they move. This one kind of gets locked off down here and then fills and decays, because there's another one out to the west behind me here, which is going to eventually come in and take control of things. This is high pressure now to the east, and that can act as a bit of a block, holding things, preventing them from moving across the country. So if you're under the wet bit, as you will be here for a time, that's going to be a prolonged period of fairly wet, unsettled weather there, I'm afraid, for eastern Scotland and into northeast England. So moving on to something we can do to help you, and that is to let you know, just remind you that our forecasters are here every day, and you can get in touch with them 09065 777675, and they're looking at all the different models, the charts. Calls are £1.55 a minute plus network access charges. So they'll be here to help you, and they've got access, as I say, to all those different models that will help you see your way and plan your way through the difficult weather. One way of looking ahead in time is to look at what we call an ensemble of forecasts, where you run a model multiple times, and that gives you an idea of all the options that the atmosphere might present in terms of how it evolves. This one, sea level pressure, and it's in London, and it shows, here's the ridge, which is where the fine weather has been for the last couple of days, at the end of the weekend and into the first part of this week. And now the pressure's falling as the lows are coming in. And here you see quite a long period of weather with lower than average pressure. The dotted line is the average pressure at this time of the year for London. And the other thing you'll notice is it gets a bit ragged from about here onwards, from about the end of the week, at the end of next week, Thursday 29th, 28th, 29th, Thursday, Friday. That period is when we start to see it's not firmly embedded in the low pressure zone. There is some sign that we might see some higher than average pressure. That's the best thing we can hope for getting things dried up and stopping raining, but not all of the runs do that. Some of them, you can see, keep us very much on the low pressure side. One of the other things we can look at is temperature, and the 850 millibar temperature shows us the sort of average temperature, if you like, where the air is coming from. So it doesn't pay any attention to whether it's day or night, whether you're on a hill or near a coast. It's just sort of, as we say in the trade, an air mass temperature. So you can see we've got cold air over the country at the moment, and that's because we originally had some northerly winds, and then we had the cold frosty nights. Now eventually, as things become more southwesterly and unsettled, you get this warmer, milder Atlantic air coming in, and you can see most of the models fairly in agreement that it's all going to be about average or just above. Some of them markedly so in here, but also a few others towards right at the end of the period starting to suggest there may be some colder than average weather. Now that's not a surprise, bearing in mind we're going into December at that point. So another thing to mention is the jet stream position, and at the moment the jet stream is heading down as a northwesterly into Portugal, Spain, and that's driving all of the unsettled weather to the south of us. That puts us on the cold side of the jet stream, which means cold weather rather than warm weather. What we've got to do to change things is to get that jet stream to turn around a bit, and indeed next week it does. So we've got a southwesterly jet then, quite a strong one, so it is going to be bringing some unsettled weather, some weather systems capable of bringing rain, but at least it will be bringing some milder weather along as well. So in terms of the pressure systems themselves, they're going to be driven across the Atlantic, this time heading towards the northern corner of the country, so Northern Ireland, northwest Scotland, northwest England, those areas that had the lack of rainfall on that radar image at the beginning for the total amount of rain last week. That's going to get a bit wetter and more unsettled again, and as you move to the south and eastern side of the country, things get a bit nearer to the higher than average pressure. So there is a chance that not everywhere will get this, bear the brunt of it all. So temperature wise, quite a big departure from average here. In week 2, it could be 2 or 3 degrees above average temperature in the south, and even just above average temperature in the north. So we're looking at a return of milder weather courtesy of those southwesterly winds. In terms of rainfall, southwesterly winds also mean wet weather, and you can see how the high ground, the first bit of high ground that those southwesterly winds are going to meet will be the mountains of South Wales, the South Pennines. So those areas could get above average rainfall. Other areas getting some rainfall, so nobody is off the hook on this one, but it does look as if we're going to see a more traditional November pattern coming out of this. But in week 3 it changes, and what we see is this anomaly for higher than average pressure. So it could be that the whole pattern buckles and we build a bit of a ridge that affects the southeastern corner of the country, and that ridge will tend to steer the lows away to the northwest towards the Faroe Islands, Iceland and so on, and just skimming past the northwestern corner of the country. So it is the hope in the forecast of slightly drier and kinder weather for those of you trying to get back out onto the fields, and hopefully get rid of some of that mud that's blocking up the farm gateways where all the traffic's going through, and very waterlogged ground, and it might make it easier for you trying to keep the roads clear as well. Once we can get the mud dried up, it should brush off, but we've got to wait for prolonged dry weather to do that, because as I said at the beginning, the evaporation rates are so low. So here we go for the mean temperatures, still above average. But the significance of this shape is that the above average part of it is now to the northern side of the country. So those areas which have been very cold are starting to see a little bit of an improvement. Okay, so let's now have a look at the next bit. And the next bit is what that does for the rainfall. Remember before, with the southwesterly wind, we had all the heavy rain over South Wales and the southern Pennines. Now it's become a bit more traditional over the western side of Ireland, western side of Northern Ireland, into northwest Scotland and so on. So it's looking and feeling a bit more traditional, which means some parts of eastern Britain could be drier than average. So this is your week 3 bit. First week in December does at the moment have just that hint that you may have something to look forward to there. Right, so let's now see what that means for the pressure pattern in week 4. As this whole thing evolves, what happens is our big ridge declines a bit, so it's a bit more of a flow. It's still a southwesterly flow, low pressure to the north and west of us, and tendency to normal pressure in the south. So no great strong signal for unsettled weather. Probably not true to say that the high is going to be a dominant feature by that point, but there should be what's left of it hanging around, enough to keep the temperatures on the above the positive side of average. This is because of southwesterly winds. It always helps. And then in terms of precipitation, still this drier area. You can just see that faint brown colour there over eastern England. Still the hint that we're close enough to the ridging in the south and east and over the near continent to give us some drier weather. And still this hint that's slightly wetter than average over these exposed northwestern coasts. So it's into December that we start to see perhaps the break that you were looking forward to getting, to be able to get some drier weather back on the fields. And if we have got this southwesterly wind, then that's going to help us to do things and evaporate that moisture. So here we are, a few chilly days. We're going to see the temperature starting to recover now. We've done the cold bit, we're now going to see it warming up, and this is because we've got that southwesterly jet stream coming in, driving air in from the Atlantic, so temperatures close to or just above average from next week onwards. Unfortunately, southwesterly winds do also mean rainfall, and this time we're going to see areas of low pressure bringing periods of rain across the country, and that means it will remain unsettled, at least in the short term. Well, there we are. That's your set of information for this week. If you want to contact us, please do so. We are available. You can look at us on Facebook for Weatherquest, or on Twitter at Weatherquest_UK. And if you want to contact us in the office, you had the phone number earlier on. We'd love to hear from you. Tell us about your farming issues, what's happening with the weather with you, what you'd really like the weather to be doing, and perhaps we can do a feature on it in subsequent bulletins. But thank you for watching for this one, and I hope it dries up for you soon.